You're listening to Soundside. I'm Libby Dankman. The August 4th primary election is fast approaching, and we are continuing our look at one of the most contested state house races on the ballot, Legislative District 32, which includes Northwest Seattle, Shoreline, Edmonds, Woodway, Mountlake, Terrace, and Lynnwood. Longtime Representative Cindy Ryu is running for state senate, leaving the district's position 1 open. And there are a bunch of Democrats vying for this very blue seat. Before the primary, we are interviewing candidates who have raised more than $50,000 to fund their campaign. Danica Noble is one of those candidates. She's an attorney who formerly worked for the Federal Trade Commission, and she joins me now to talk about her candidacy. Danica, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So I understand you left your job at the FTC to run for office. You have raised the most money out of anybody in the race so far. Obviously, this is a new kind of thing for you, running for office. You haven't been elected to a government position before. How are you pitching voters on your candidacy?
Well, I'd say it's true that I haven't held elected office before, but I have been appointed to positions of representation before. I represented the United States in work in Ukraine on anti-monopoly and economic law reform. So I certainly have some experience in representing lots of views in high-stakes negotiations with people from all kinds of different perspectives. But how I'm pitching voters on my candidacy is really that I am pretty different than the rest of the candidates. And in part, that's because of the background you mentioned. So with the Federal Trade Commission doing consumer protection and anti-monopoly work for nearly 2 decades. And about half of that was, a lot of healthcare related work. There was some retail. But the last half, and especially the last 5 years, was in the Technology Enforcement Division, was in our AI task force. And so I am bringing some missing pieces, not just to this race, but really to Olympia in terms of consumer protection, enforcement experience, and really that AI policy background that is just not something that anybody has in Olympia right now. So I think that's an important piece for this moment.
Your campaign website talks about affordability, especially the high cost of groceries, housing, childcare, in addition to AI regulation, like you just mentioned, improving Washington's public schools. What would be your first priority if you win election?
Well, there's a few pieces of low-hanging fruit that if I were to win, that I would want to work on. The first is the unfinished business with getting cell phones out of schools. That was a bill that I really worked on in Olympia, went to all the hearings, ran some lobby days, worked with the legislators. We didn't get that done. It became a study. And I don't think that we need to study it anymore. I think we need to get these cell phones out of school. So that's one that I would want to continue working on.
Where do you stand on the millionaire's tax? I've talked to your other competition here in the district, some of them, and they've all said they would have voted for the millionaire's tax, the tax on high incomes. How would you have voted on it and why?
Yeah, well, I do think that the millionaire's tax was a step towards unregressing our tax system, which is something that we sincerely need in a big way. If Washington is the 49th most regressive state, the millionaire's tax might have taken us to 45th or 46th. So there's a lot of work to do. The millionaire's tax wasn't perfect. 9.9 is a funny number. And I think there were some things that were, said to be covered by the millionaire's tax that I'm not sure really will be covered. And I don't think it did enough to relieve the tax burden that exists right now. So I think it's an important first step in unregressing the tax system, but it's one that is going to take a while before any money comes in, and it's only a first step.
But it sounds like you would have been a yes vote on that as well.
Yes, I would have voted for the millionaire's tax.
So on the subject of revenue and therefore budgets, the upcoming session in Olympia, legislators will again, for the 3rd session in a row, be dealing with likely a serious budget shortfall. Former Governor Christine Gregoire has criticized the growth of the state budget from about 44 billion in 2017 to roughly 80 billion today. Now, if you take 2017 numbers and put them through an inflation calculator, that's about a 60 billion to 80 billion dollar growth over less than 10 years. Gregor says that spending has gotten out of control. The Democrats need to kind of look in the mirror on that. Do you agree or disagree with that criticism? Do you think the state budget has gotten too big?
Well, one of the things I think makes answering that question difficult is there's not a tremendous amount of transparency on where the money is spent and linking it to outcomes. And that was a bit of a surprise to me as I was doing education advocacy over the last 5 years in Olympia, trying to figure out exactly where we were not getting enough funding or where we were potentially misspending, because some of that information you had to get from the local school, some from the district, from the state, and it wasn't just very linked at all. And I think that's true for other parts of the agencies as well. And that was something that was very different than, again, the work that I did in Ukraine, where we were tracking down to like $25 because it was US taxpayer money, where it went, when it was spent, and linking it to outcomes. I think that would make answering a question of whether we have enough money or whether we have a spending problem an easier one to answer. So I think we are in need of some more transparency, and I think that will help. But on schools specifically, my time in PTAs, I have 3 kids, and I've been in the advocacy director for their schools. And being in those PTA meetings, I know those schools, those administrators, and those teachers are really being stretched too thin. We are asking too much of them. And so I know that we do need to do better on education at least. And I would love to see more transparency to make those links, to make those connections smarter and invest in what works.
The governor has said to cover the budget gap, he doesn't want to see any new taxes this next session, that basically it's going to come from cuts. Do you agree with the governor on that approach? Would you prefer to be looking at new revenue, or do you have areas where you would look in order to, again, tighten the belt and meet that budget shortfall?
Do I think there's room for efficiency gains? I do. I think there probably are room for efficiency gains. I also do think that we need, again, more of that transparency and accountability to be smart about that. I don't want to be cutting transition to kindergarten and running START, programs that really work and are important, or services for housing insecure youth. But I'm not sure that cuts alone will do what we need to get done right now. We are in the 7th richest state in the country, and we're having some trouble covering the basics that is what government exists for. So I think we need to have some opportunities to think about, like, again, for schools, they've been taking cuts for years and years. I know these agencies more recently have been taking cuts in the last few years, but schools forever. We can't take another bite at that apple, or the whole system, could collapse. And so there are areas where we need to make sure that we are covering the basics, and I'm not sure that we're doing that. And I do think that there is room to get revenue from again, some of the places where there are large concentrations of revenue here.
And would that take the form of lowering the capital gains tax threshold? Would that take the form of potentially lowering the millionaire's tax threshold to, people's incomes, household incomes below $1 million? Or are you talking about some sort of new tax like a statewide jumpstart tax or other options? What do you mean when you say you can, there's room to kind of look at areas where wealth is concentrated and, potentially for revenue?
Okay, I will answer that question, but I want to go back to the last one too, which is where we're spending our money. One of the things that's ballooned besides the state budget has really been the state liability and payouts through lawsuits. So if we're not a little bit smarter about catching things or doing it right on the front end, we're going to keep paying out. And I am really concerned kind of with where the economy is going in terms of digital transformation and what kinds of liability there may be there. So just to go to that back question, I think we need to be smart about how we are funding things so we don't end up paying more on the back end. And one microcosm of that is you can't spend a better dollar as a society than on early childhood and early childhood learning in childcare. And if we do invest in that, and I do think childcare is infrastructure, and I do think people in the 32nd, South Snohomish is a childcare desert, really want some of those and need some of those services. If we got there, we might be able to save more money on the back end for expensive things as well. In terms of a concentration of wealth and where we might have room for revenue, I don't think that all the companies are necessarily covering the externalities of the way they do business right now. So probably one example would be we have companies that have already built so many data centers, and these data centers are taking quite a bit of our energy. They're taking up quite a bit of space, and they're super important to some of these companies. We need to make sure that the benefits from that are shared more broadly. So we need to take a look at the tax incentives and loopholes and do more, and certainly more than they did, although it was another good step, but more than they've done there. And one of the ideas that's been bandied around, which I think is worth looking into, is addictive algorithmic tax. So right now, these big platforms have zero price products, but they're not free. We definitely pay with our attention. Our children pay with their attention. And I think we need to figure out a way to tax that for a few reasons. One, because of the incredible concentration of wealth that is coming from those systems. And second, especially when we're talking about our youth, we don't want the incentive to be to keep my kid on there as long as you can. Make it more addictive, make it more engaging. I think that there needs to be an offset there. So I think there's room. I don't think that's an instantly easy to fix, but it's an idea of where we have some, business activity that could probably generate some much needed funds for the state.
And that's our time. Danica Noble, candidate for position 1 in Legislative District 32 for the State House. This district covers parts of Northwest Seattle, Shoreline, Edmonds, Mountlake, Terrace, and Lynnwood. Danica, thank you so much for being here. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Soundside. Don't forget you can listen live on KUOW 94.9 FM Seattle at noon and 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, or anytime online at KUOW.org or on your favorite podcast app.